Hey up, it's Steve from the Old Yorkshire Geek. It's list time again. Another Star Trek list, of course. This time we're looking at On What Culture. Star Trek 10 Things You Didn't Know About Vulcans. So let's just get on with it, shall we? Let's just get straight into the list. Here we go. Right, all of this talk of the Vulcans, I don't know what they're talking about, is sure to raise an eyebrow or two. And here we are, some Vulcans that we know. There's obviously T'Pol from Enterprise, Spock from the original series and the movies, and Tuvok, who we know from Star Trek Voyager. There have been other Vulcans as well, obviously, but they're the main ones, I suppose. No doubt the most famous alien species in sci-fi history, next to the Klingons, the Vulcans have entered the cultural collective imagination. Their Boimler-ready, fully cosplayable pointy ears and eyebrows, impeccable, if often exasperating logic, and life-affirming live long and prospers are immediately recognisable to even the most novice non-Trekkie. The only character that made it from pitch to second pilot, Spock, arguably is Star Trek, or at least there wouldn't be much of a show without him. When the original series began to air, his popularity soared to the dismay of the man in the captain's chair. He was the star, wasn't William Shatner, so it's obviously a blow to his ego when his co-star is essentially more popular than he is, and gets more fan mail, but, you know, that's actors, innit? Moreover, the Vulcan IDIC, infinite diversity in infinite combinations, might well have been introduced by Gene Roddenberry so he could sell a few medallions. I've never really understood that infinite diversity in infinite combinations thing to do with Vulcans. I can imagine humans saying it, but I can't imagine Vulcans saying it, because they'd just say, infinite diversity is logical. And they wouldn't harp on about it, would they? In fact, Leonard Nimoy initially boycotted the idea, probably for that reason, but it soon came to represent the very ethos of Star Trek. Later, the fully Vulcan Tuvok provided us greater insight into the culture, because remember Spock was half human. Provided us greater insight into the culture, and in Star Trek Enterprise we got to look at Vulcan interstellar politics pre and post Kirshara Revolution. By the way, don't forget Tuvok. He may have been a full Vulcan, but don't forget there was that episode where we learned he initially didn't want to embrace logic and wanted to explore his emotions. You remember that? I think a lot of people forget about that episode of Voyager. And Tuvok's shady past. But anyway, 57 years after Star Trek first aired, the Vulcans remain as popular as ever. Each week we learn more and more about the species through Spock on Strange New Worlds, with the Vulcan set to join the lower deckers. It's perhaps high time then that we did a little revision on our fellow Federation founders, fire up those fancy holographic skill domes. I've no idea what that means. Here are 10 things you should know about the Vulcans. Or maybe they're on about those things, them learning things that they have, that we saw in the Star Trek, the JJ Star Trek movies. We saw those, didn't we? Which were terrible. Right, number 10, Satanic Panic. This is from The Cage, or the Menagerie, depending on how you want to look at it. Gene Roddenberry's 1964 pitch for Star Trek gave us our earliest glimpse at a Vulcan, or half-Martian, as he is then described, for Mr. Spock, the first lieutenant Roddenberry wrote. The first view of him can be almost frightening, a face so heavy-lidded and satanic you might almost expect him to have a forked tail. He has a slightly reddish complexion and semi-pointed ears. So it ended up being nothing like that, essentially, didn't he? Ended up looking like that. With green blood. The devilish half-alien creature didn't appeal to everyone, however. Famously unhappy with the too cerebral first Star Trek pilot The Cage, network NBC made the unusual decision to commission a second, fearing the reaction of the Bible Belt to Roddenberry's demonic demi-terrestrial. They wanted the guy with the ears gone before any man could go again. Roddenberry had to fight hard to keep Spock on the bridge, and even after NBC relented, they remained concerned about a religious backlash. As Herbert Solow, executive at Star Trek production company Desilu Studios, put it, it was as if they believed that after Satan had been cast out of the Garden of Eden, he was cast into Star Trek as Science Officer Spock. Americans. The panic over Spock's satanic attained strange heights when promotional material was airbrushed to round Spock's ears and straighten his eyebrows. As Star Trek began to air, the NBC tried to limit Spock's screen time and kept pushing for a change to more regular makeup. In fact, the audience had an altogether different reaction to the pointy ears. Spock mania had begun, and so had the story of the Vulcan people. There we go, yes, that's, as I said, he ended up looking nothing like his original description. He didn't have a reddish complexion, he ended up having green blood, didn't he? But they kept the ears and the eyebrows. But the eyebrows were less prominent as the series went on. I think after the second pilot, when No Man Has Gone Before, his eyebrows were really like that. Well, were really slanted. They brought them down a bit, didn't they? And don't forget, he smiled in the second pilot as well. He smiled in the first pilot, and he smiled in the second pilot as well when they were playing. Well, more of a smirk, I suppose, than a smile when they were playing 3D chess with Kirk. Right, let's go to the next one. I forgot this. What culture does them on different pages? Let's carry on. Star Trek 10 things you didn't know about Vulcans. Number 9, Spock, Amania, Nalia. I've no idea where we're going with this one. It's obviously from Futurama. The heads in jars. Living heads in jars. As Adam Nimoy, husband to Terry Farrell, Jadzia Dax, tells it in For the Love of Spock, early in 1967, 16 magazine published the Nimoy's home address in error, and soon enough trucks began to arrive with sacks of mail. Not only were the Nimoys inundated with letters, how can you put a home address in error? How can you mistakenly put somebody's address, in a magazine? Anyway, not only were the Nimoys inundated with letters, but fans also paid a direct visit to their house, even knocking at the door, expecting a tour or nabbing a bit of greenery from the garden as a souvenir. Spock was an instant hit with fans, and they wanted more. This was Spock mania. NBC soon changed its tune, giving the Vulcan a far more prominent role. That same year, issue 1 of the first ever Star Trek fanzine, entitled Spockanalia. I wonder where that were going to come from. Naturally dedicated, for the most part, to all things Vulcan, was published. Over its 5 editions, sounds like something I'd try. I'd end up quitting after 5. The last published in June 1970, Spockanalia featured original fan stories, songs, essays on Vulcan biology, culture, art, psychology, the structure of Spock's family, and even, I bet they didn't mention his adopted sister and half-brother. And even a how-to on how to beat a Vulcan at 3D chess. D.C. Fontana, Gene Roddenberry and Leonard Nimoy also sent in letters. Issue 1 of Spockanalia is known for giving us the term and concept Nivar, meaning two form. In Dorothy Joan Heights, the territory of Rigel, a Nivar to be performed by 2 voices and a Vulcan harp. Nivar is now the name of the unified Vulcan Romulan planet in the 32nd century. Stupid! The essay proposed structural sketch of the Vulcan language in issue 3 of Spockanalia, again by Jones Height, as Lieutenant Junior Grade Dorothy Conway, PhD, was also the first known fan attempt to outline the Vulcan language. There we go. So Spockanalia sounds like bags of fun, doesn't it? Number 8, Getting on Your Nerves, and there's Spock doing the Vulcan neck pinch on Kirk Thatcher in Star Trek 3. And he'd get a producer credit just for that. Certain Vulcan customs have become so universally well known that even the non-Trekkie might flip you the live long and prosper if they can manage it. The split hand salute was conceived by Leonard Nimoy, based on a Jewish blessing. Yes, it's a letter, isn't it? It's a Yiddish letter, Hebrew, but I forgot what it is. I forgot what he said it represented. The split hand gesture, during filming of A Mock Time, an episode that gave us a wealth of other insights into Vulcan culture to be discussed later. Season 1, episode 2. Season 2, sorry, episode 1. That one. Nimoy was also responsible for the creation of another now mainstream Vulcan manoeuvre, the nerve or neck pinch. The script for the Season 1 episode The Enemy Within called for Spock to KO Kirk's evil transporter twin with a blow to the head using the butt of a gun. But Nimoy thought that Vulcans wouldn't practice such levels of violence. They would. Instead, they would know enough about human anatomy to knock anyone unconscious with a simple pinch to a nerve in the neck. A combined demonstration from Nimoy and William Shatner, who fainted on command, convinced director Leo Penn to include the nerve pinch in the episode. According to the Star Trek Encyclopedia, the shorthand FSNP, famous Spock nerve pinch, then came to be used by the original series scriptwriters as a light-hearted way to refer to Nimoy's immobilising invention. Very funny, very funny. But yeah, that's another cool thing from Star Trek that's become synonymous, in culture generally. Not just, for Star Trek fans. Number 7, don't you ever sweat. Well, there's sweat in there, aren't there? In a famous scene from Enterprise, the decontamination chamber. Resembling humans with slightly pointier ears on the outside, a similarity explained in canon by the likes of Hodgkin's law of parallel planetary development, the Eretans and those aliens from the chase, Vulcans have a fairly distinct biology on the inside. Dr. McCoy's heart might have been in the right place, despite his caustic humour, but in a manner of speaking, Spock's was not. Aside from their heart being where their liver should be, we know that Vulcans have green blood thanks to copper-containing hemocyanins, although on Earth these normally give a blue colour in their oxygenated state. Oh, excuse me. Vulcans can also function to a degree without a brain. I like that episode, Spock's brain. Go without sleep and water for several days, and further adapted to their desert planet possess inner eyelids or nictitating membranes to protect against the glare of the Vulcan sun. In the Star Trek Voyager episode The Haunting of Deck 12, Tom Paris asks the titular question, to which the antiperspirant Tuvok replies, not unless the temperature reaches 350 degrees Kelvin. 350 degrees Kelvin. It's actually 350 Kelvin. You don't say degrees. Same with Celsius. You don't say degrees Celsius. You just say Celsius. You said degrees centigrade or degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know why. It's just the way it is. 350 Kelvin is 76.85 degrees Celsius. See, I've done it myself now. Celsius, degrees centigrade. 170.33 degrees Fahrenheit, or in other words, as hot as Vulcan. By the way, Vulcan is a real planet, if you believe in that sort of thing. It's closer to the sun than Mercury, and some people say they have spotted it, but it's never been discovered, so it's obviously not there. But anyway. According to the Starfleet Medical Reference Manual, 1977, however, I didn't know Starfleet were around in 1977. Vulcans lack sweat glands as a water-saving measure. Their epidermis is actually capable of absorbing water from the air. Heat loss is achieved instead via specialised hyalothermonic cells in the dermis and through an extreme dilation of the blood vessels, which gives a greater surface area for cooling. Vulcans also have a mind-boggling average heart rate of 242 beats per minute and blood pressure of 80/40. But as you can see, T'Pol's sweating profusely there. So they do sweat in Enterprise anyway. Maybe they'd changed by the time the original series came along, which was like over 100 years later. Maybe they'd evolved in 100 years not to sweat. Number 6. My very easy method just speeds up naming Vulcan. Oh, here we go. That's what I'm just talking about. Vulcan, a bit closer to the sun than Mercury. In 1860, French astronomer... By the way, I've not read this, so this is new to me as well. In 1860, French astronomer and mathematician Urbain Le Verrier, who had previously discovered Neptune, announced to the world in Paris that he'd found yet another planet, this time in the inner solar system, and it was to be called Vulcan. Originally predicted as a way to explain the precession of the perihelion of Mercury within Newtonian mechanics, Le Verrier's supposed observation of Vulcan was controversial, and eventually Einstein's equations put paid to the need for its existence. The myth and name lived on, however, and not least in Star Trek. In Gene Roddenberry's original pitch, Spock and species were from Mars, but by the time NBC was promoting the first season of the original series, the Vulcanians were from Vulcanis, quickly becoming the Vulcans from Vulcan as the episodes aired. According to Star Trek Star Charts 2002, Vulcan is located in orbit of the real-life star 40 Eridani A, part of a trinary system with binary pair B and C at about 400 AUs from A, 400 astronomical units, which is quite a way, isn't it? An astronomical unit is the distance from the Earth to the Sun, so it's 93 million miles, so it's like 4 billion miles, let's call it, from its sun. So it's like Pluto distance. Anyway, from its suns, should I say. Anyway, the Eridani location, which originated in James Blish's, love that name, it's a cool name, isn't it, James Blish. Wish I were called that. James Blish's 1968 short story adaptation of Tomorrow is Yesterday has been widely used in other reference materials, and Roddenberry himself approved the idea in a letter for the July 1991 issue of Sky and Telescope magazine. In the Star Trek Enterprise episode Home, the distance between Earth and Vulcan was given as 16 light years for the first time. Within half a light year, this matches the actual distance between Earth and 40 Eridani A. I think it takes like 3 days or something to get there, doesn't it? In the original series at maximum warp. Right, number 5, Neurodivergence. There is the Romulan commander from Balance of Terror, the original series episode. Before the time of awakening, the Vulcans were mostly a savage, warmongering race ruled by their emotions with atomic bombs and psionic resonators. I'm spitting, sorry. They nearly destroyed themselves. Then along came Surak to drop his own bomb of logic to calm the Vulcan mind. A schism occurred between those who began to follow his teachings and those who marched beneath the Raptor's wings. To quote the Starfleet officer lying on the sickbay floor of the USS Prometheus, Romulans and the De Bruin. This divergence during and after the time of awakening was both literal and spiritual, therefore, but divergence has another meaning that can equally be applied to the Vulcans. Many people with autism, like this writer, who was only formally diagnosed in 2019, have come to identify with the Vulcans over the years. From the very beginning with Spock, Vulcans have represented an otherness that is deeply familiar to the neurodivergent. The perceptions of Vulcans by non-Vulcans can offer a mirror to the perceptions of people with autism by people without. I wouldn't say the Vulcans are autistic. Much like our logical on-screen counterparts, people with autism may sometimes appear rude, blunt, awkward, or just plain different. In actuality, we have difficulties with social interaction and may be hypersensitive to certain noises, smells, tastes and textures, amongst other struggles and strengths. Yes, that's it. As a father of I nearly said Vulcan son. As father of an autistic son, I'd say that's very accurate. But you can't really compare Vulcans to that. I know they're a human-created fictional species, but they're supposed to be aliens, aren't they? So they behave how they want, can't they? Can't give them human, characteristics, even though they are humanoid. I'm digging a hole, aren't I? It's certainly also a common misconception that being autistic means that you're as emotionless as a pre-chip Zoom-type android. In fact, we must battle to regulate our feelings in a neurotypical world. In that sense, the Vulcan's mastery of mind over emotion is highly appealing. This writer can certainly testify to wanting to be more Vulcan at times. In the case of my son, it essentially wears his heart on his sleeve and just he says everything that comes into his mind, and he doesn't care what other people think. You may have heard him in my live streams. He'll come down and he'll start just telling me everything, and I'll tell him, you're telling the world. Not that many people watch my streams, but anyway, right, let's move on. Number 4, Vulcan is a place on Earth, and that's obviously from the Enterprise episode Carbon Creek, which is a really good episode, I must admit. I don't usually like episodes like that, but Carbon Creek, were really, really good. You don't have to travel 16 light years to visit Vulcan. It's right here on Earth in southern Alberta, Canada. The town of Vulcan may predate Star Trek, having been named in 1910 by a surveyor after the Roman god of fire, but it has certainly embraced the connection. In 1995, the town erected a giant replica of the Enterprise A, and in 1998 built a tourist centre called Trek Station, designed to look like a landed spaceship. Attracting fans from around the world, Vulcan was awarded the title of official Star Trek capital of Canada in 2010 and hosts the Vulcan Star Trek convention each year in July and Spock Days in June. And I'll put a picture of it. I'll put a picture of it there. There. Leonard Nimoy also paid a visit to the town in 2010, not long before his retirement. To the fans that lined the streets in costume to greet him, he said, "I have been a Vulcan for 44 years." In 2010, "I figured it was time I came home." Nimoy, who had previously supported the town's eventually unsuccessful attempt to host the world premiere of Star Trek 2009, laid down his handprint in the traditional Vulcan salute and unveiled a bronze bust of Spock made in his honour. To pay tribute to his father after he had passed away, Adam Nimoy visited Vulcan in 2016 to unveil a plaque that was placed beneath the bust of Spock reading, "In loving memory of Leonard Nimoy, we have been and always shall be your friend." Yeah, very good. I don't know how they showed that. That's got nothing to do with... I know it's a Vulcan on Earth, but why did they just put a photo of Vulcan, South Alberta, Canada? Anyway, number 3, what does Quack know anyway? And that's from the episode Little Green Men, Deep Space Nine episode Little Green Men, where they went to Earth. In that episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, sorry, I scrolled the wrong thing then. In that episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where little very orange men descend on Roswell during that famously infamous year of the weather balloon, 1947, Quack states the Ferengi will have warp drive technology centuries before humans, or Klingons, or even the Vulcans. The history of Vulcan spaceflight is a bit muddled and fragmentary, contradicted in other places in the canon, but they and the Klingons definitely had warp drive a lot earlier than that. It is possible that the Vulcans were a warp-capable species even before their time of awakening, our 4th century. We know they were capable of space travel at least by the 9th century BCE. The Pagem Monastery was founded on another planet in 850 BCE, old Earth calendar of course, after nearly destroying themselves in the 4th century, booting the gaggle of soon-to-be Romulan Vulcans off the planet and learning to chill out a bit. It apparently took the Vulcans about 1500 years to rebuild their society and head back out into the galaxy. The Vulcans definitely had warp-capable ships by the 20th century, as one of them gave us Velcro in 1957, that's in Carbon Creek. And they had run-ins with the Andorians before that. Something happened in the 21st century between humans and Vulcans that involved warp drive, I believe. Zephyr Cochrane's flight. And by about the time Quack said the Vulcans should have achieved warp drive, they were already capable of warp 7, just as Earth had launched its first warp 5. Yes, as I say, Star Trek often contradicts itself. It's not perfect. Even classic Star Trek, which is amazing, quite often gets things wrong. So nothing's perfect. Cool episode, Little Green Men. And it was also used, before we go on to this one, it was also used as a basis for a book, I think. I can't remember what they call the book. I think the Reeve Stevens wrote it, but I could be wrong. Garfield and Judith Reeve Stevens. I could be wrong, but because of Quack and all them heading back to Roswell in their shuttle, their Ferengi shuttle. I think the shuttle may have remained there. I can't remember how they got back, to be honest. But something happened anyway, and because of America's involvement there with these Ferengi, they were able to build essentially the Botany Bay, the ship that Khan stole. I think Khan stole it in 1997 to escape from Earth during the eugenics wars, and that were based on the technology from the Ferengi shuttle. I can't remember how they got back home in Little Green Men. It's been a while since I've seen it. Anyway, Number 2, hormones are raging, synapses blazing. And there's the doctor doing one of his whatevers. Oh, and then Tuvok crying. But want this something to do with the doctor rather than Tuvok? I can't remember. Every 7 years, about, Vulcans are biologically summoned to return to their homeworld to play a very literalised version of F, marry, kill. During the Pon farr, a Vulcan must take a mate or die, fight and kill or die, or meditate so much they probably wish they were dead. If nothing is done, the resultant neurochemical imbalance is likely fatal within days. Suggested in various ways over the years with Spock, Tuvok and Vorik. Vorik's another Vulcan crew member on Voyager, who was originally supposed to be Torik, who we saw in the Lower Decks episode of TNG. Same actor, different character. I don't know why they decided he wasn't going to be the same character. Maybe because they didn't want to pay the writer of the Next Generation episode royalties for the name. Hollywood, eh? Anyway, and not least in that song the Doctor sings, it would appear that Vulcans only have sex during the Pon farr. The Starfleet Medical Reference Manual even goes so far as to say that the Vulcan male... That's not entirely true, we've seen. Does that mean Spock was going through his Pon farr in Star Trek Strange New Worlds when he was, he and T'Pring were getting down to it quite a lot in Season 1 of Strange New Worlds? Maybe you were. The Starfleet Medical Reference Manual even goes so far as to say that the Vulcan male is only capable of sex approximately once in 7 years. This was never meant to be the implication, however. As original series writer D.C. Fontana stated in Captain's Logs, the unauthorised Complete Trek Voyagers, Vulcans mate normally any time they want to. However, every 7 years you do the ritual, the ceremony, the whole thing. The biological urge. This every 7 years business was taken too literally. We didn't mean it only every 7 years. Every 7 years would be a little bad, and it would not explain the Vulcans of many different ages, which are not 7 years apart. Yes, it would. Yeah. Like I said, they can do it whenever they want, but every 7 years they've got to, basically. That seems to be the general consensus moving forward in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. We've got Spock, T'Pring and Chapel certainly haven't gone without for that long. What's Chapel got to do with it? She's not Vulcan. Anyway, right, number 1, speaking of Chapel, going to the chapel. And there's the original Chapel, Majel Barrett, as Nurse Christine Chapel. I thought they were microphones and they're actors. Remember, she loved Spock, but it was unrequited love. But not in Strange New Worlds. Anyway, as we learned in the mock time, most Vulcans enter into a form of arranged marriage via telepathic bond as young children. Spock and T'Pring's minds were locked together when they were but 7 years of age, so that years later they would be drawn back to each other either by the Pon farr for the Kunut Kalifi, literally marriage or challenge. Others, like T'Pol and Kos, are wed without the onset of the Pon farr, and if you're thousands of light years away from your bonded beloved, like Ensign Vorik, you might have to declare Kunut Solik, marriage or proposal, to find a new mate. Most recently, in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode Charades, it was canapes and teas, not the birds and the bees, very good, for T'Pring and Spock during the Vishal ritual. Be aware, this is an engagement dinner with the prospective in-laws that will seriously challenge your composure, especially if you're accidentally human. It's in that episode Charades, or Charades, however you pronounce it. Spock had a transporter accident and ended up human, fully human, so that to disguise him as a Vulcan. And for some reason, he forgot how to be a Vulcan. A bit of a silly episode. It was fine, but, don't know how he forgot how to be Vulcan. Anyway, the Vishal dinner was entirely new lore for the Vulcans, created from scratch, as Strange New Worlds co-showrunner and executive producer Henry Alonso Myers put it, purely out of us thinking what would be a funny thing to watch Spock go through as a person pretending to be a Vulcan. The props used for the dinner were also the most expensive of the season. The Vulcan kettle was 3D printed, and for pouring convenience for Ethan Peck, contained the exact amount of water required for the cup that sat within the larger vessel, which was itself made out of solid brass. What are you telling us this for? Of course, we know where things are headed for T'Pring/Spock, where marriage is concerned. His name is Ston. Who could blame T'Pring either when at the moment her fiancé is off to another chapel? And that's it. So there we go. But they didn't tell us about, as I said, they did mention it earlier on. I forgot the name of it now. Like a revolution. The Kishara. Yeah, the Kishara. Not revolution, but that incident in Enterprise. Essentially, when the Vulcans changed. Because in Enterprise, the Vulcans are not the same Vulcans we see in the original series. Remember, like 100 years have passed by the time we get to the original series from Enterprise. And the Vulcans were slightly different. Yes, they were logical, but not completely. And they were kind of, they weren't really the same Vulcans. They were often quite vindictive and nasty and, and racist, to be completely honest. But not fully embracing Surak's teachings. But in the Kishara episodes, it was like a 3-part in season 4 of Enterprise. They find the Kishara stone, which shows that Surak's writings, which I think were kind of legendary at that point, that actually found the actual ones. And Archer even held Surak's Katra in his mind for a while. And that's when the teachings of Surak really took over on Vulcan, and embracing even more logic became the way. And it was T'Pau that were the leader really of that movement, who we saw in Amok Time, which is related to Spock. But these were, going forward, then Vulcans became like the Vulcans that we know in the original series and beyond. But before that, they were kind of shifty with the Vulcans, and some of them were even working in cahoots with the Romulans. But anyway, they were good with season 4 of Enterprise. All of Enterprise were good. I really enjoyed it. Anyway, so there we go. So that's 10 things you didn't know about Vulcans, or did. I knew most of them anyway, but never mind. Right, so we'll leave it there. So thanks for watching. Wherever you are, look after each other, and until next time, I'll see thee.